Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I remember Sarah like it was yesterday. Tall, with that messy auburn ponytail always swinging as she rushed between classes, a backpack stuffed with psych textbooks and energy bars. We weren't best friends or anything, but we shared a dorm freshman year at UT Austin. Bonded over late-night cram sessions for Intro to Abnormal Psychology. She was the type who laughed too loud at bad jokes and dreamed of becoming a therapist, helping kids from broken homes like hers. That was back in 2015. By 2017, we drifted a bit. She'd transferred to a smaller program in Houston for her junior year. But we still liked each other's Instagram posts, you know? The occasional "miss you" text. It was a Friday night in late spring, May 19th, I think. Sarah had been visiting family in San Antonio for the weekend, some aunt's birthday or something. She texted her roommate around 10:30 p.m. Stopping for gas outside SA. Be home by 2-ish. Traffic sucks. The roommate, Emily, didn't think much of it. Sarah was reliable, always checked in. But when morning came and no Sarah, Emily started freaking out. Called her phone straight to voicemail. Pinged the family, who said she'd left their place hours earlier. By noon, they reported her missing. The cops traced her last location to this dingy gas station off I-10, about 20 miles east of San Antonio. One of those outdated spots with flickering fluorescent lights, a couple of pumps, and a mini-mart selling stale coffee and lottery tickets. Not a big chain like Buc-ee's, more like a mom-and-pop operation with a sketchy vibe, surrounded by scrubby Texas brush and a patch of woods that backed up to a drainage ditch. Her car, a beat-up blue Honda Civic she'd inherited from her dad, was still there in the lot. Tank full, like she'd just pumped the gas. Keys dangling in the ignition, engine off. Her phone on the passenger seat, battery dead but no signs of struggle. Wallet in the glove box, untouched. It was eerie, but not in a movie way. Just wrong, like she'd stepped out for a second and forgotten everything. They pulled the security footage right away. Grainy black and white from 2 cameras, one over the pumps, one angled toward the entrance and restrooms. Around 11:45 p.m., there she was, Sarah, in jeans and a hoodie, filling up the tank. She paid at the pump with her card, then walked toward the side of the building where the restrooms were. The camera caught her silhouette disappearing around the corner at exactly 11:52. And that was it. No one else in frame, no suspicious vans pulling up, no commotion. She just didn't come back. The clerk inside said he hadn't seen her. Too busy restocking cigarettes. No customers around that late. The search kicked off fast. San Antonio PD, Texas Rangers, even some volunteers from nearby. They combed the woods with dogs, dredged the ditches, checked every truck stop within 50 miles. Flyers went up everywhere. Missing? Sarah Jenkins, 21, 5'9", last seen at Hilltop Gas on I-10. Her family was devastated. Mom crying on the local news, pleading for tips. Theories flew wild. Abduction, human trafficking. Maybe she wandered off disoriented. I followed it obsessively, refreshing news sites, joining Facebook groups for missing persons. Every time I stopped at a gas station, I'd glance at the restrooms and feel this chill, imagining her last steps. Months turned into years. Tips came in. A sighting in Austin, a possible match in Dallas, but nothing panned out. The case went cold by 2019. Emily moved on, graduated. I did too, got a job in marketing in Dallas. But Sarah lingered in the back of my mind. Her family held vigils annually, keeping hope alive. Then, in early 2023, almost 6 years later, everything changed. A woman walked into a police station in Albuquerque, New Mexico, disheveled, but alive. It was Sarah. Turns out, she'd been struggling with severe anxiety and depression that spring of 2017, stuff she hadn't shared with anyone, not even her therapist. College pressures, family issues, it all piled up. That night at the gas station, after using the restroom, she had a panic attack. Felt like the walls were closing in. Instead of going back to her car, she just walked. Cut through the woods, hitched a ride with a trucker heading west. No plan, just needing to escape. Ended up in New Mexico, assumed a new name, worked odd jobs, waitressing, cleaning motels, off the grid, no social media, no contact. She said she regretted it every day, but was too ashamed to come back, convinced everyone had moved on without her. Therapy helped her finally reach out. DNA confirmed it was her. No foul play, no abduction, just a young woman overwhelmed by life, making an impulsive choice. Her family flew out immediately. There were tears, forgiveness, all that. She's back in Texas now, living quietly near Houston, finishing her degree online. We reconnected last year over coffee. Awkward at first, but real. She apologizes a lot, says she thinks about that gas station too, how one bad night changed everything. It's not a happy ending like in stories, but it's closure. Makes you realize disappearances aren't always sinister. Sometimes people just lose themselves for a while. It was the summer of 2011, and I was on a solo road trip down the East Coast, trying to clear my head after a rough breakup. I'd been driving for hours that night, pushing my old Honda Civic through the humid Georgia backroads, when my gas light flickered on. I pulled off the interstate into a dingy little station just outside Macon. One of those 24-hour spots with flickering fluorescent lights, a couple of rusty pumps, and a convenience store that smelled like stale coffee and motor oil. It was around 1 a.m., and the place was deserted, except for me and this black sedan, parked at the far end of the lot, under a busted street lamp that cast everything in shadows. I got out to fill up, the pump clicking away in the quiet night, and that's when I first heard it. A faint, rhythmic thumping. At first, I thought it was my imagination, or maybe the wind knocking something around. But no, it was muffled, like someone pounding from inside a confined space. I froze, mid-pump, and traced the sound. It was coming from the trunk of that black sedan. My heart started racing. Was it an animal? A loose tire? Or something worse? I edged closer, pretending to check my tires, and the thuds got clearer, almost desperate. There was no one in the driver's seat, but the engine was idling softly, exhaust puffing out in the warm air. I didn't want to be the guy who overreacted, but every true crime story I'd ever heard flashed through my mind. I decided to play it safe and headed inside the store to alert the cashier. He was an older man, probably in his 60s, scrolling on his phone behind the counter, surrounded by racks of lottery tickets and beef jerky. I was about to blurt it out. "Hey, there's weird noises coming from that car's trunk out there," when I heard tires screeching outside. We both looked up, and through the grimy window, I saw the sedan tearing out of the lot, headlights slicing through the darkness as it sped toward the highway. The driver must have slipped back into the car while I was walking in. I caught a glimpse of him. A white guy, mid-40s, clean-shaven with short dark hair, wearing a plain gray t-shirt. He didn't look back, just floored it and vanished into the night. The cashier shrugged it off. Probably just kids messing around. But I couldn't shake the unease. I paid for my gas, grabbed a soda to steady my nerves, and drove off, replaying the scene in my head the whole way to my motel. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a prank, or maybe a mechanical issue. But that thumping echoed in my ears. A couple of days later, back home in Atlanta, I was flipping through the local news on TV while unpacking. And there it was, a story about a 19-year-old woman named Emily Hargrove who'd gone missing from Warner Robins, a town not even 20 miles from that gas station. She'd been last seen leaving a party late at night, and her family was frantic. The photo they showed was of a smiling brunette with freckles, the kind of girl who looked like she had her whole life ahead of her. My stomach dropped. The timeline matched. The location was too close for coincidence. I grabbed my phone and called the tip line listed on the screen, spilling everything. The black sedan. I even remembered part of the license plate. Something like Georgia tags starting with JHK. The driver's description, the banging sounds. The detective I spoke to sounded interested, took my statement over the phone, and said they'd follow up. Weeks turned into months, and I heard nothing. I'd checked the news obsessively, but there were no updates, no arrests, no sightings of the car, no sign of Emily. I started second-guessing myself. Maybe the noises were just my tired mind playing tricks. Maybe the driver was innocent, rushing off for some unrelated reason. The guilt gnawed at me. What if I'd yelled out sooner, or snapped a photo of the plate? I even drove back to that gas station once, hoping for security footage. But the cashier said their cameras were dummies, just for show. Then, about a year later, in 2012, I got a call from the Warner Robins police. They'd finally cracked the case, but not in the way I'd feared. Turns out, Emily hadn't been kidnapped at all. She'd run away voluntarily after a blowout fight with her parents over college plans and a controlling boyfriend. She'd hitched a ride out of state with a friend, changed her name, and started fresh in Florida, working at a beachside cafe. The missing person alert had lingered because she hadn't contacted her family right away, wanting space to sort things out. As for the black sedan at the gas station, it was a dead end. Probably unrelated. Maybe a guy with a faulty trunk latch or tools rattling around. The detective thanked me for the tip anyway. It had helped them rule out foul play early on. Looking back now, in 2025, I'm relieved it all turned out okay. Emily eventually reconciled with her family. I saw a follow-up article years later about her getting married and starting a family of her own. As for me, it taught me to trust my gut but not jump to the worst conclusions. I still get a chill thinking about that night, but mostly I'm just glad no one was hurt. If anything, it reminds me how ordinary moments can spiral into something bigger in our minds, only to resolve in the most mundane ways. It was about 3 years ago now, during one of those solo road trips I used to take to clear my head. I'd been driving from California to Colorado, cutting through the vast, empty stretches of Nevada on Interstate 80. It was well past midnight. and I'd been pushing the limits of my fuel gauge, not wanting to stop in the middle of nowhere. But eventually, I had no choice. I pulled off at a dingy little gas station just outside of Winnemucca. The kind of place that's seen better days. Peeling paint on the building, a neon sign buzzing erratically with half the letters burned out, and only one sodium vapor streetlight flickering over the pumps like it was on its last legs. The lot was deserted except for my old Subaru and this beat-up sedan, parked way over on the far edge, half hidden in the shadows beyond the reach of the light. It looked like it had been through hell. Dented fenders, mismatched tires, and windows tinted so dark they might as well have been painted black. No one was in the driver's seat, and I didn't see any movement inside. I figured it was just abandoned or maybe belonged to the clerk on shift. I shook off the unease. Road trips like this always amp up your imagination, and got out to fuel up. The air was crisp and cold, carrying that faint metallic tang of desert dust, and the only sounds were the hum of the pump and the distant whine of semis on the highway. As I stood there, nozzle in hand, watching the numbers tick up on the display, I glanced toward the station's convenience store. Through the grimy glass windows, I could see the clerk, a middle-aged guy with a scruffy beard and a faded baseball cap, pacing behind the counter. He was alone in there. No customers, just shelves of dusty snacks and a flickering TV mounted in the corner. Suddenly, he stopped, locked eyes with me, and started waving his arms frantically. His mouth was moving, shouting something, but the thick glass muffled it completely. I furrowed my brow and shrugged, mouthing, "What?" back at him, assuming maybe he was warning me about a faulty pump or trying to upsell some overpriced beef jerky. That's when I caught it. A subtle shift in my peripheral vision. I turned slightly and checked my driver's side mirror, the one angled just right to catch the edge of the lot. In the reflection, I saw a movement in that abandoned sedan. It was slow, deliberate. A shadowy figure rising up from the back seat, like someone who'd been lying down and was now sitting upright. My heart slammed into my ribs. Who hides in the back of a car at a deserted gas station in the dead of night? A hitchhiker? A thief? Worse? I didn't wait to find out. I yanked the nozzle out mid-pump, gas sprayed a little onto the pavement, and jumped back into my car, keys already in hand. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of there, tires screeching on the cracked asphalt. As I merged back onto the interstate, accelerating hard, I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. Sure enough, the sedan's headlights flicked on, piercing the darkness, and it pulled out after me. My mind raced with every worst-case scenario. Was this some kind of setup? A robbery gone wrong? Or just a coincidence? I floored it, pushing my Subaru well over 90 miles per hour, the engine whining in protest. The road was straight and empty, but every curve felt like it could hide an ambush. The sedan kept pace for what felt like an eternity, maybe 5-10 miles, but it wasn't gaining. Finally, as the lights of the next town, Lovelock, started glowing on the horizon, I saw those headlights veer off at an exit ramp, disappearing into the night. They didn't follow me into town. I didn't stop until I reached a well-lit truck stop in Lovelock, pulling in among a cluster of semis and rigs. My hands were shaking as I locked the doors and caught my breath. I called the local sheriff's office right then, describing the whole thing, the car, the figure in the back, the clerk's warning. The deputy on the line took my report seriously, said they'd check out the gas station and keep an eye out for the vehicle. Turns out, when they followed up the next day, the clerk confirmed it. He'd spotted the guy slinking into the back of that sedan about 20 minutes before I arrived, looking suspicious as hell. Thought it was a vagrant at first, but when he saw the man watching me at the pump, he tried to warn me. The car was gone by the time the cops got there, but a few weeks later, I got a call from the Nevada Highway Patrol. They'd arrested a guy matching the description in a stolen vehicle not far from there. Turned out, he was a fugitive with a warrant for armed robbery, probably looking for an easy target to carjack, or worse. I finished my road trip without any more incidents, but I learned my lesson. No more late-night stops in the middle of nowhere if I can help it. And these days, I always check my mirrors twice. I grew up in a dusty little town called Fairview, right off Highway 77 in northern Oklahoma. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Kids rode bikes down gravel roads. Friday nights meant high school football under the floodlights. And the biggest excitement was the annual county fair. But even in a spot like that, where life moved slow and predictable, there was one story that stuck with folks like a burr on your sock. The night the gas station attendant vanished back in Depth 94. His name was Tommy Hargrove, a lanky kid in his early 20s with a mop of brown hair and an easygoing smile that made him popular with the locals. He'd been working the graveyard shift at the old Texaco station on the edge of town for about a year, saving up for community college down in Stillwater. Tommy was one of those guys who dreamed big, but hadn't quite figured out how to get there yet. Always talking about heading west to California, maybe becoming a mechanic or something with cars. My Uncle Ray was the one who stumbled into the middle of it all. He was a trucker back then, hauling feed for the farms around Enid. And he'd pull long hauls that kept him on the road till the wee hours. One night in late summer, August 17th I think it was, he rolled into the Texaco around 1 a.m. for a pack of Marlboros and maybe a coffee to keep him awake for the last leg home. The station's lights were blazing like always, casting that harsh fluorescent glow over the pumps and the cracked asphalt lot. The bell above the door jingled as he walked in, but there was no Tommy behind the counter. Just an eerie quiet, broken only by the hum of the soda fridge. On the counter sat a half-eaten ham and cheese sandwich on wax paper, mustard still smeared on the bread, and next to it, the cash register drawer cracked open a few inches. Money was still inside. No robbery, at least not an obvious one. Uncle Ray called out a couple times, thinking maybe Tommy was in the back stocking shelves or taking a smoke break, but no answer. He poked around a bit, checked the bathroom, even hollered outside toward the pumps. Nothing. Tommy's beat-up Ford pickup was still parked in the employee spot out front, keys dangling from the ignition and his wallet tucked in the glove box with a few 20s and his driver's license inside. It was like he'd just stepped away for a second and never come back. Uncle Ray wasn't one to panic easy. He'd seen his share of weirdness on the road, but this felt off. He grabbed the phone behind the counter and called the sheriff's office. Within 20 minutes, the place was swarming with deputies from the county, their cruisers' lights flashing blue and red against the dark prairie sky. They secured the scene, dusted for prints, and started asking questions. Folks in town woke up to the news the next morning, and it spread like wildfire. Tommy Hargrove was gone. No note, no struggle, no blood. Just poof, vanished into the night air. The real kicker came when they reviewed the security tapes. Back then, The station had one of those grainy black and white cameras pointed at the counter and another overlooking the pumps. Nothing fancy, but enough to capture the basics. The footage showed Tommy working a quiet shift, restocking candy bars and chatting with a couple of regulars earlier in the evening. Around 12:45 a.m., a guy in a dark hoodie pulled up in an older model Chevy sedan. No plates visible in the dim light. He came inside, bought a pack of gum and a soda. Nothing unusual. Tommy rang him up, all smiles, like it was just another customer. But then, instead of heading back to his car alone, Tommy grabbed his jacket from under the counter and walked out with the guy. The outdoor camera caught them heading toward the sedan, Tommy gesturing like he was explaining something, maybe directions or helping with a flat tire. They both got in the car, and it pulled away onto the highway, heading north. That was it. No sign of force, no argument, nothing that screamed foul play. The sedan vanished into the night, and neither Tommy nor the hoodie guy was ever seen in Fairview again. The town went into a frenzy. Search parties combed the fields and ditches along the highway for days, helicopters buzzing overhead from the state police. They put out APBs on the sedan, but without a clear plate or description, it was like chasing smoke. Tommy's family, his mom worked at the diner downtown, his dad was a farmer out east, was devastated. They plastered missing posters everywhere, from the post office to truck stops clear up to Kansas. The local paper ran stories for weeks, speculating everything from a random abduction to Tommy running off on his own. Whispers started. Maybe he was mixed up in drugs or owed money to the wrong people. But those who knew him swore he was clean. Just a kid with big dreams and a steady job. The investigation dragged on for months. The FBI even got involved briefly, since it crossed state lines potentially. But leads dried up fast. Winter came, blanketing the plains in snow, and the searches tapered off. Life in Fairview moved on, but the story lingered. Kids at school would dare each other to sneak out to the Texaco at night, and adults would shake their heads over coffee, saying it was a reminder to lock your doors. My Uncle Ray never forgot it. He'd tell the tale at family gatherings, his voice dropping low as he described that empty counter. It gave everyone chills, driving past that station in the dark, wondering if Tommy was out there somewhere, lost or worse. But here's where it gets resolved. In a way no one saw coming, fast forward to 2018, over 2 decades later. A detective in Oklahoma City, working cold cases, decided to revisit the file as part of a digitization push. Technology had come a long way since '94. Better facial recognition, DNA databases, all that. They enhanced the old tapes and ran the hoodie guy's blurry face through some new software. Turns out it matched a guy named Derek Mills, a small-time drifter from Tulsa with a record for petty theft and DUIs. He'd been arrested in Missouri back in '96 for something unrelated. But by then, the connection wasn't made. When they tracked him down, he was living quiet in a trailer park outside St. Louis working as a mechanic. The pieces fell into place. Derek spilled it all under questioning. He and Tommy weren't strangers. They'd met a few months earlier at a bar in Enid, struck up a friendship over beers and shared stories. Tommy had confided he was struggling, stuck in a dead-end town, dealing with family pressures. And yeah, he was gay in a place where that wasn't talked about openly back then. Derek, who was bi and had his own reasons for wanting a fresh start, bad debts, an ex he wanted to escape, convinced Tommy to bail that night. It was impulsive. Derek showed up at the station, They talked it out quick, and Tommy decided to go. They left the register open and the sandwich there to make it look like foul play, figuring it'd buy time before anyone looked too hard. Tommy's car stayed behind to throw off the trail. They drove to California, changed names. Tommy became Alex Reed and built new lives. Derek got clean. Tommy went to trade school, became an auto tech like he'd always wanted. They weren't together romantically long, but stayed friends. Tommy never reached out home because he feared rejection, but as years passed, regret built up. The detective convinced Tommy to come forward. He flew back to Oklahoma that year, reunited with his family in a tearful scene at the airport. His mom hugged him so tight she nearly broke ribs, and the town threw a quiet, welcome-back barbecue. No charges stuck. Statute of limitations on faking a disappearance, and honestly, no one wanted to prosecute after all that time. Tommy explained it all in an interview with the local paper. He'd been young, scared, and desperate for change. Now, in his 50s, with a partner and a couple of adopted kids in San Diego, he apologized for the pain he'd caused. These days, the old Texaco's a Shell station, remodeled and bright. Folks still mention the story sometimes, but it's more of a cautionary tale about communication and not bottling up your troubles. My Uncle Ray passed a few years back, but I like to think he'd have gotten a kick out of the ending. No ghosts or monsters, just a kid who needed to find his way. It doesn't give me chills anymore when I drive by. Instead, it's a reminder that sometimes people vanish because they're searching for themselves, and with time, they can come back. Back in the early 2000s, I was hauling freight cross-country for a logistics company out of Phoenix. My routes often took me through the vast, empty stretches of Arizona desert, where the highways seemed to stretch on forever under those big, starry skies. It was tough work. Long hours behind the wheel, fighting fatigue with black coffee and classic rock on the radio. But it paid the bills and gave me a sense of freedom. One night in the summer of 2003, I was running a load from Las Vegas down to Tucson, and around midnight, my fuel gauge started dipping low. I pulled off I-40 at a small, dusty gas station just outside Kingman. It was one of those old-school spots, you know? Flickering neon sign, a couple of pumps, and a convenience store with shelves stocked mostly with beef jerky, sodas, and lottery tickets. The kind of place where locals and travelers crossed paths but rarely lingered. As I hopped out of my rig to fill up, I noticed this young guy lingering near the payphone by the entrance. He couldn't have been more than 22 or 23. Skinny build, messy brown hair, wearing faded jeans, a gray hoodie, and a backpack slung over one shoulder that looked like it had seen better days. He was pacing back and forth, his sneakers scuffing the cracked pavement, and every few minutes he'd glance around like he was expecting someone. His face was pale, eyes wide and darting, with dark circles underneath that suggested he hadn't slept in a while. He seemed out of place, like a college kid who'd wandered too far from campus. I didn't think much of it at first. The desert attracts all sorts. Hitchhikers, runaways, folks down on their luck. But as I pumped my diesel, I overheard him asking a couple of other drivers if they could give him a lift east toward Flagstaff. His voice had a shaky edge to it, polite but desperate. Inside the store, while I grabbed a pack of smokes and a candy bar, I mentioned him to the clerk. A grizzled older guy with a name tag that read Earl, and a mustache that probably hadn't changed since the 70s. Earl leaned on the counter, wiping it down with a rag, and nodded knowingly. "Yeah, that kid's been out there since late afternoon," he said in a gravelly drawl. "Came in earlier asking to use the phone, said his ride fell through or something. Looked spooked, but wouldn't say why. I've seen plenty like him. Folks gambling in Vegas lose their shirt and end up stranded. Offered him a sandwich from the cooler, but he just paced. If he's still here when I close up, I'll call the sheriff to check on him." I paid for my stuff and headed back out. By then, it was pushing 1:30 a.m., and the station's lights cast long shadows across the lot. The kid was still there. But now he was talking to two men who'd pulled up in a white Ford pickup truck. Older model, maybe a 90s F-150, with Arizona plates and a toolbox in the bed. The guys looked like locals, mid-30s, one with a baseball cap and a goatee, the other clean-shaven with a flannel shirt. They were leaning against the truck, smoking cigarettes, and the kid was gesturing animatedly, explaining his situation. I couldn't hear the full conversation from where I was topping off my tank, but it seemed like they were offering him a ride. He hesitated for a minute, glancing back at the store, then nodded and climbed into the passenger side. The truck idled for a bit, engine rumbling low. Before they pulled out onto the highway, headlights cutting through the dark toward the east. I finished fueling, climbed back into my cab, and rolled out myself, not giving it another thought. Nights like that blend together after a while. A couple of weeks later, I was on another run through the same area, tuned into a local AM station for traffic updates. That's when the news segment came on. A brief report about a missing person. It caught my ear because the description matched the kid from the gas station. Early 20s, brown hair, last seen hitchhiking near Kingman after leaving Vegas, heading home to somewhere in New Mexico. Family hadn't heard from him, no sign of his backpack or belongings. They mentioned he'd been traveling on a shoestring budget, maybe thumbing rides. My stomach dropped. I pulled over at the next rest stop and replayed the night in my head. The pacing, the scared look, the white truck. It all lined up too perfectly to be coincidence. I didn't waste time. As soon as I got back to base in Phoenix, I called the Kingman police and gave them everything I remembered. The time, the truck's description, even a partial plate number I'd subconsciously noted. They took my statement seriously, said it matched the timeline of the disappearance, and promised to follow up. Turns out, the gas station had security footage that corroborated my story, showing the kid getting into the truck. The investigation dragged on for months. Leads on similar vehicles, interviews with locals, but eventually, about a year later, they tracked down the two guys. They were brothers from a nearby ranch, not criminals, just a couple of rough-around-the-edges types who'd offered the kid a lift out of kindness. According to them, they'd dropped him off safe and sound at a truck stop in Flagstaff around dawn, where he said he had a friend picking him up. No foul play on their end. They just hadn't come forward earlier because they didn't realize the connection. As for the kid, his family got closure too. It turned out he'd made it to Flagstaff but decided to detour off the grid for a bit. Personal issues, maybe some family drama he was avoiding. He resurfaced a few months after the report, calling home from a payphone in Albuquerque, apologetic but alive. The vanishing was more of a mix-up than anything sinister. Spotty cell service back then, a young guy not checking in, and assumptions spiraling from there. The police closed the case, and I got a thank you note from the department for my tip. These days, when I pass that exit near Kingman, I still think about him, not with dread, but as a reminder of how easily wires get crossed in the middle of nowhere. The desert can play tricks on you, but sometimes it's just life being complicated, not some dark mystery. I was 19 years old, fresh out of my first year of college, and I decided to embark on this grand adventure, a solo cross-country road trip from California to New York. It sounded romantic in theory. Endless highways, diners, and sunsets, but the reality was a lot of lonely miles, cheap motels, and the occasional bout of nerves. I'd been on the road for about a week when this incident happened in New Mexico, somewhere along I-40 in the dead of night. It was around 2 a.m., and I'd been driving for hours, my eyes heavy from the monotonous hum of the engine. I needed gas, a bathroom break, and something to eat. So I pulled into one of those isolated 24-hour gas stations that dot the desert highways. You know the type. Bright fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a few pumps scattered in the lot, and a convenience store that looks like it hasn't been updated since the 80s. As I parked my beat-up Honda Civic near the entrance, I glanced around the lot out of habit. There weren't many vehicles, just a couple of sedans at the pumps and a big rig idling off to the side, its cab light on. I could see the silhouette of the driver inside, a burly guy with a baseball cap, staring out the window. At first, I didn't think much of it. Truckers are a staple on these routes, and people watching passes the time. But as I got out of my car and walked toward the store, I felt his eyes on me. It wasn't a casual glance. It was fixed, intense. I quickened my pace a bit, telling myself I was just being paranoid from all the true crime podcasts I'd been listening to on the drive. Inside the store, the air was stale, smelling of stale coffee and hot dogs rotating endlessly on those metal rollers. The clerk, an older woman with tired eyes, was behind the counter flipping through a magazine. I grabbed a basket and started browsing the aisles for snacks, some chips, a candy bar, maybe a bottle of water to keep me hydrated. As I wandered toward the back, near the coolers, I heard the door chime behind me. Footsteps followed, heavy and deliberate. I turned slightly and saw him, the trucker from the cab. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with a scruffy beard and a flannel shirt that looked like it had seen better days. He didn't pick up a basket or head straight for anything specific. Instead, he just lingered. I moved to the next aisle, pretending to compare energy drinks, and there he was again, appearing at the end of the row. Every time I stopped to look at something, he'd pause too, hands in his pockets, not even pretending to shop. My heart started picking up speed. Was he mirroring me on purpose? I tested it by doubling back to the chip aisle. I'd already grabbed some Doritos, but I wanted to see. Sure enough, he followed, stopping a few feet away and staring at the same shelf without touching a thing. The store wasn't big, maybe 4 or 5 aisles total, but it felt like a maze, with him shadowing my every move. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Why wasn't he buying anything? Why me? Trying to shake it off, I headed to the checkout, my basket lighter than I'd planned because I just wanted out. The clerk rang me up slowly, making small talk about the weather. Hot out there, even at night, huh? And I forced a smile, nodding. As I paid with cash, fumbling a bit with the bills, I heard footsteps approach from behind. It was him, lining up right at my back, close enough that I could smell the faint scent of diesel and sweat. He had nothing in his hands, no items, no excuse. The clerk glanced at him curiously, but said nothing. My mind raced. Was this some kind of game? A threat? I grabbed my bag and bolted out the door without waiting for my change, the bell jingling wildly behind me. Outside, the night air hit me like a slap. Cool and dry, with the distant howl of a coyote somewhere in the darkness beyond the lot. I practically ran to my car, keys already in hand, locking the doors the second I slid inside. Through the windshield, I watched as he exited the store empty-handed and climbed back into his truck. The engine roared to life, headlights flashing on like accusing eyes. I pulled out quickly, merging back onto the highway, my hands gripping the wheels so tight my knuckles turned white. In the rear-view mirror, I saw his rig follow, its massive grille growing larger as he accelerated to match my speed. Panic set in. The highway was empty at that hour, just endless blacktop stretching into the void, with no other cars in sight. I kept checking the mirror. He was right there, not passing, not falling back, just tailing me steadily. My mind flashed through worst-case scenarios. What if he forced me off the road? What if he had a weapon? I remembered all those stories about hitchhikers and truckers gone wrong. About 10 minutes in, I spotted an exit sign for a small town. Nothing major, just a cluster of fast food joints and a motel. I swerved off without signaling, hoping to lose him. He followed, but slower, his truck lumbering behind. I pulled into the brightest spot I could find, a 24-hour McDonald's drive-thru, packed with a few late-night customers and well-lit like a stadium. I parked under a floodlight, engine running, phone in hand, ready to dial 911. Through the window, I watched his truck slow at the entrance, hesitate, then keep going down the road, disappearing into the night. I sat there for what felt like hours, probably closer to 30 minutes, heart pounding, sipping the water I'd bought just to have something to do. No sign of him returning. Eventually, I mustered the courage to get back on the highway, taking a detour through side roads just in case. Looking back, it still creeps me out how deliberate it all felt, like he was testing boundaries or something. Maybe he was just lonely or bored, or it was all a coincidence in my overactive imagination. But I learned a lesson that night. Always trust your gut on the road. I made it to New York a few days later, unscathed. And now I stick to busier stops and daytime travel whenever I can. That encounter was a wake-up call, but thankfully, it ended there. Just a weird blip in an otherwise epic trip. It was a Tuesday evening in late autumn, the kind where the sun dips below the horizon early, leaving the sky a bruised shade of purple. I'd just finished a long shift at the warehouse. My back ached from lifting boxes all day, and all I wanted was to get home, heat up some leftovers, and crash on the couch. I pulled into the old gas station on the edge of town, the one with the flickering neon sign, and the pumps that always seemed a bit grimy. It wasn't crowded, just a couple of other cars and a beat-up white van parked way off in the corner of the lot under a dim street light. As I was pumping gas, topping off my tank with about $20 worth, I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel behind me. I turned around, and there she was. a woman in her mid-30s maybe, with stringy brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and wearing a faded hoodie that looked like it had seen better days. She had this frantic energy about her, like she was on the verge of tears or panic. "Excuse me," she said, her voice shaky but insistent. "My boyfriend, he just left me here. We had a fight, and he drove off without me. I need a ride, just a few miles down the road to my sister's place. Please, I don't have anyone else to ask." I paused, nozzle still in hand, and took a closer look. She wasn't making eye contact. Her gaze kept darting away, flicking toward that van in the shadows. Her hands were fidgeting with the hem of her hoodie, and she stood a little too close for comfort, invading that personal space bubble most people respect. Something didn't sit right. It wasn't just her story, which sounded rehearsed, but the way she kept shifting her weight, like she was waiting for a signal. The gas station was right off the highway. There were plenty of trucks and cars passing by, and the attendant was visible inside the mini-mart. "Why me, specifically?" "I'm sorry," I replied, trying to keep my tone polite but firm. "I don't really give rides to strangers, but if you're in trouble, I can call the police for you. They're better equipped to help with something like this." I reached for my phone in my pocket, figuring that was the safest play. If it was legit, they'd sort it out. If not, it might scare off whatever was going on. Her face changed in an instant. The pleading look twisted into anger, her eyes narrowing. "Forget it," she snapped, her voice laced with frustration. "I don't need the cops involved." She spun on her heel and stormed back across the lot, her footsteps quick and heavy. As she approached the van, the driver's side door swung open, and a stocky guy in a baseball cap stepped out. He looked pissed, gesturing wildly at her and yelling something I couldn't quite make out. Maybe, "What the hell?" or "Get in." She climbed into the passenger seat without a word, and he slammed the door behind her before hopping back in. The van's engine roared to life, tires kicking up dust as they peeled out of the lot and onto the road, heading north. I stood there for a moment, heart pounding a little faster than it should have, watching their taillights disappear into the dusk. The pump clicked off behind me, signaling the tank was full. I hung up the nozzle, got back in my car, and locked the doors before driving off. On the way home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd dodged something bad. Maybe it was a setup for a carjacking or a robbery. Lure someone in with a sob story, then have the accomplice jump them once they're vulnerable. Or worse, human trafficking. I'd read stories online about teams working gas stations like that. Whatever it was, my gut had screamed no, and I'm glad I listened. The next day, I mentioned it to a co-worker who'd been a cop in his younger years. He nodded knowingly and said it sounded like a classic ploy. Happens more than people think. He advised me to report it to the local police non-emergency line, just in case it matched any patterns they were tracking. I did, giving them the details. The time, the van's description, as much as I could recall, no plates, unfortunately, and what she'd said. They thanked me, said they'd log it, and that was that. Nothing dramatic came of it, no news stories or follow-ups, but it made me more cautious from then on. Now, I always park under lights, keep my head on a swivel, and trust that inner voice when something feels off. In the end, I got home safe that night, had my dinner, and slept a bit uneasier, but grateful for the uneventful close to what could have been a nightmare. was a few years back, during one of those long-haul drives across the Midwest that I used to do for work. I'd been on the road since early morning, hauling equipment from Chicago to some podunk town in Nebraska. And by midnight, my tank was running on fumes. The highway had thinned out to nothing but endless cornfields and the occasional flickering billboard. So when I spotted the faint glow of a gas station sign up ahead, I pulled off without a second thought. It was one of those old school places, rusty pumps, a dingy little convenience store attached, the kind that's probably been there since the 70s and hasn't seen a remodel since. I parked under the harsh fluorescent lights, grabbed my wallet, and headed inside. The bell above the door jingled weakly, announcing my arrival to an otherwise empty store. The air smelled like stale coffee and motor oil, with that faint undercurrent of fried food from the hot case near the counter. I nodded at the clerk, a middle-aged guy with a name tag that read Waidra Dave, and a face that looked like it had seen too many late nights, and made my way to the coffee machine in the back. As I poured myself a large black, something felt off. The place was too quiet, even for midnight in the middle of nowhere. No radio playing, no hum of conversation, just the low buzz of the coolers and the distant rumble of a semi on the highway. That's when I noticed him. A man standing stock still in the corner by the drinks cooler. He wasn't browsing the sodas or snacks. He was just there. Tall and lanky, wearing a faded denim jacket that hung loose on his frame, with greasy hair tucked under a baseball cap. His eyes were fixed on the clerk, unblinking, like he was studying him for some unspoken reason. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he was just waiting for a ride or something. But the tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to make the hairs on my neck stand up. Dave, behind the counter, kept glancing over, his movements jerky as he restocked cigarettes or whatever. But he didn't say a word. I grabbed a pack of gum to go with my coffee and headed to the register, trying to act casual. Up close, Dave's face told a different story. His eyes were wide, almost pleading, darting between me and the man in the corner. It was like he was screaming for help without making a sound, lips pressed tight, sweat beading on his forehead despite the AC blasting. I swiped my card, muttered something about the weather being clear for driving. But Dave just nodded stiffly, his voice barely above a whisper as he handed me my receipt. "Drive safe," he said, but it came out more like a question. That's when the man in the corner finally moved. Not much, just a slight shift in his stance. But then he spoke. His voice was low, gravelly, trembling like he was holding back tears or anger or both. "I need a ride," he muttered, not looking at me or Dave, more like he was addressing the floor or some invisible presence. "Can't leave yet. They won't let me leave." It didn't make sense, and the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. Who was they? Was he high, lost, or something worse? I didn't stick around to find out. I grabbed my stuff, pushed through the door with the bell jingling again, and hustled back to my truck. As I started the engine, I glanced through the window one last time. He was still there, unmoving, staring at Dave like nothing had happened. I drove off into the night, heart pounding a little faster than it should have. The whole thing replayed in my head for the next hour or so. Dave's desperate eyes, the man's shaky words. I considered calling the cops, but what would I say? There's a weird guy at a gas station. It felt silly, and besides, I was already miles away. Eventually, I pulled into a motel, crashed for a few hours, and tried to put it out of mind. The next day, on my way back east, curiosity got the better of me. I took the same route and swung by the gas station again around noon. The place looked different in daylight, less ominous, more just run down. But there were 2 police cruisers parked out front, lights off but officers milling around. One was talking to Dave, who looked exhausted but relieved, notepad in hand. A couple of locals were gathered nearby, chatting in low voices. I didn't stop. I just slowed down enough to take it in and kept driving. Later that evening, back home, I did a quick search online for any news from that area. Turns out, it was nothing supernatural or sinister, just a sad, human story. The man was a local named Robert something or other, in his late 40s, who'd been struggling with severe schizophrenia for years. He'd wandered off from his group home earlier that day, off his meds, convinced that they, some hallucinated authority, were keeping him trapped. Dave had recognized the signs from previous encounters in town and had been trying to keep things calm until help arrived. But he was scared stiff. After I left, the man didn't escalate. He just stood there until Dave managed to slip a call to the police from under the counter. They showed up, talked him down gently, and got him back to where he needed to be for treatment. No arrests, no violence, just a mental health intervention. I felt a mix of relief and guilt reading about it. Relieved it wasn't some horror movie scenario. Guilty I hadn't stuck around or offered help. These days, I think about it whenever I stop at a late-night gas station. Makes me appreciate the quiet ones a little more, and reminds me that sometimes the scariest things are just people going through their own private hells. It was one of those grueling night shifts that left me bone-tired, my eyes heavy and my mind foggy from hours of monotonous work under fluorescent lights. I'd been pulling doubles at the warehouse to make ends meet. And by the time I clocked out around 2:30 a.m., all I could think about was getting home to collapse into bed. But my gas tank was running on fumes, and I needed a jolt of caffeine to stay alert for the drive. So I pulled into the familiar 24-hour gas station on the outskirts of town. The one with the flickering neon sign and the rows of pumps bathed in harsh yellow light. The place was deserted at that hour, just like always. No other cars in the lot, no hum of traffic from the nearby highway. I parked by the pumps, filled up quickly, and then headed toward the convenience store entrance, my sneakers crunching on the gravel-strewn pavement. To the right of the door stood the big outdoor ice freezer, one of those massive chest-style units humming softly with its compressor, stacked high with bags of ice that nobody seemed to buy this late at night. As I walked past it, something caught my peripheral vision. A subtle shift, like a shadow detaching itself from the darkness. I froze for a split second, my heart rate spiking. There, crouched low behind the freezer, was a man. He was partially obscured by the machine's bulk, but I could make out his form. Disheveled clothes, a hooded sweatshirt pulled up to hide his face, and eyes fixed intently on me. He wasn't moving now, just watching, like a predator sizing up prey. My stomach twisted into knots, a cold wave of adrenaline washing over me. Who hides like that at 3 a.m.? What was he waiting for? I forced myself to keep walking, pretending I hadn't noticed. My steps measured and casual, even as my mind raced. Getting to the safety of the store was my only priority. Inside, the fluorescent bulbs buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the shelves of snacks and drinks. The cashier, a middle-aged woman named Rita, I'd seen her name tag on previous stops, was behind the counter, flipping through a magazine. She looked up as I approached, and I leaned in close, keeping my voice low. "Hey, there's a guy hiding behind the ice freezer outside. He's crouched down, watching people. You might want to check it out." Her face paled instantly, the magazine slipping from her hands. "Oh my God, not again," she muttered, her eyes widening with recognition. She didn't hesitate. Grabbing the phone from under the counter, she dialed 911 with practiced urgency, her voice steady but laced with fear as she reported the suspicious person lurking on the premises. While she spoke to the dispatcher, she motioned for me to stay put, mouthing, "Wait here." Once she hung up, she filled me in, her words tumbling out in a hushed rush. It turned out this wasn't the first time. The same guy, or at least someone matching his description, had been spotted around the station on multiple nights over the past couple of weeks. He'd hide in shadows, behind dumpsters or equipment like the ice freezer, always around the graveyard hours when the place was quietest. He targeted lone customers, especially women or anyone who looked vulnerable, approaching them suddenly or following them to their cars. Rita wouldn't go into graphic details about what he'd done before, maybe to spare me the worry, or perhaps because it was still under investigation. But she implied it had escalated from harassment to something more threatening, enough to put the staff on high alert. "We've had complaints," she said grimly. "Cops have been by before, but he always slips away. Not tonight, though." She insisted I stay inside until the police arrived, offering me a free coffee from the pot behind the counter. I accepted, though my hands shook as I held the styrofoam cup, the hot liquid doing little to calm my nerves. We waited together, peering occasionally through the glass doors at the dimly lit lot outside. The man was still there, or at least his shadow was, unmoving now that he knew he'd been spotted. Minutes stretched like hours, but soon enough, the wail of sirens pierced the night, growing louder as 2 patrol cars pulled in with lights flashing but no blare to avoid spooking him prematurely. The officers were efficient. 2 of them approached the freezer cautiously, flashlights drawn, while the others checked the perimeter. There was a brief scuffle. The man tried to bolt when they called out to him, but he didn't get far. They had him in cuffs within moments, leading him back to the cruisers under the pump lights. From what I could overhear through the door, he was a local transient with a history of similar incidents, possibly fueled by addiction or desperation, but nothing that pointed to a larger threat. The police took my statement right there in the store, along with Rita's, and assured us they'd handle it from there. Likely charges for trespassing and loitering, maybe more if prior victims came forward. By the time I left, the sky was starting to lighten with the first hints of dawn. I drove home feeling a mix of relief and lingering unease, but mostly grateful for the quick resolution. The station beefed up its security after that. Brighter lights, more cameras, and I made a point to avoid stopping there alone at odd hours. It was a stark reminder of how vulnerable those late-night routines can make you. But in the end, it wrapped up without any lasting harm. Just another story to tell over coffee with friends.